Coming up in today's episode. Coming up in today's episode, we are going to talk about all things character animation, but more specifically, how characters can impact production costs, right? Big question. We'll go a little bit deeper into how character animation is made to begin with, and what changes impact your bottom line. Big question.
Bottom dollars.
We're also going to ask some important questions like, what do you call that handle that puppeteers use?
Oh, that thing?
Yeah.
That, what's it? On the marionette? On the marionettes?
Stick around and find out. I was going to say F around and find out.
Fuck around and find out.
Hello.
Hey.
Welcome back.
Welcome back.
My name is Kathryn.
My name is Will.
And this is Behind the Pixel. It's an open pixel podcast where we bridge the knowledge gap between those who buy creative content and those who make it.
That's a fantastic delivery.
I'm getting a little spicy with it.
That is spicy. That is very spicy.
Yeah. And, I guess not really related to spice, but you know who buys the most creative content?
Who buys the most creative content?
NSYNC. Because they
the boy band?
Yeah.
Okay.
They just buy all day.
Bye. Yeah, well, in this 98-degree weather, if you're going to the back streets and you're ready to buy creative content from those new kids on the block, I think we got you covered for the topic today. You like that?
I do. Does that cover all of them?
I don't think so.
Okay. Let us know your favorite boy band in the comments down below.
You know who I used to listen to, boy band, a long time ago? New Edition. I still listen to them.
New Edition.
Yeah. They're the African-American boy group original.
Boys to Men?
Boys to Men actually I think was formed after New Edition.
Really?
I think. Don't quote me on that.
Okay.
Don't cancel me.
We gotta look at this.
But
K-pop bands now have up to like 12 people.
K-pop is crazy.
It's so great. I love it.
It's like boy bands to scale. Yeah, it's crazy.
All right. Well, so clearly we're on a totally different tangent today. Today's topic I am personally very excited about as the resident character animator in our group.
Yeah.
Because today is all about understanding character animation costs. And these are 4 projects that are dealing with character animation. Just want to make that perfectly clear, just in case that wasn't. And we're going to talk about how those different requests for these characters can affect the cost both before and during the production.
Yeah.
So hopefully this will help you to make, better projects with really awesome characters.
Yeah.
But we always start by talking about the problem that we see within both sides of the aisle here.
Stealing from Jon Stewart a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
It's one of our heroes.
Yeah. Tell us about the problem that happens within character animation for projects.
Yeah. So character animation is arguably, depending on who you ask, the longest and most time-consuming part of the animation process.
Definitely.
The production workflow in animation, usually. It typically requires more steps, more stages to complete, and you need to see the characters at multiple stages within the workflow so that you can progress forward. We talked about workflow in one of those last episodes. I think it was episode 3. We talked about the whole production workflow, at least here. Very different in different places, but for the most part, I think it's safe to say that everyone has these kinds of stages. So one of the biggest problems that we see is that there's a disconnect in understanding how much work goes into bringing those characters to life and how exactly that translates into costs in the future. So
big problem.
Before we get into deeply, why don't we define some terms so that we're not just throwing around terms all willy-nilly and making you more lost and more confused than you started with.
That's fair. Because ultimately when we're thinking about character animation as a whole, there are really 3 major or distinctive roles that go into the process of making a character move overall.
And I should specify that these 3 roles can be thought of as the function. Sometimes you can have a whole department that will include a bunch of these same roles in one department.
That's true.
Depending on your scale.
You can have multiple of the same type of role for sure. Right. So the very first role we're going to be talking about is a character designer. The name might be pretty straightforward, but it's basically an artist who is creating ultimately the look and feel of your character or your multiple characters throughout your piece. And so this person takes into account a lot of different things that you might not consider at the time when you're designing. So the silhouette of the character, the shapes, the colors, the textures, or any design that's going to accentuate sort of the emotion behind the character or its personality, and anything that might connect to your audience. That's something to keep in mind here. We're going to kind of talk about that throughout this time today, but it's the idea that, you can think about it if you're selling glasses as an example, whether they're regular glasses on your face or sunglasses on your head. Who knows who would wear both at the same time?
I don't think I know anyone who does that.
No. Neither. Yeah. But you want your character to potentially also wear glasses if that's the target audience that you're going for.
Yeah.
But you can think about this even more deeply, right? Because who is that character? Is that character a librarian? Are you selling glasses to athletes who might not typically wear glasses?
Right.
Like, what is your audience? Are you targeting cool nerds like us?
Right.
Like, what do we look like? A designer is going to take those specific questions that they ask into account to figure out what that overall look will be based on your target audience. So why don't you tell us about the next role?
So the next term that we're going to use here throughout our conversation is a term that's important to wrap your head around when a character is not going to be hand-drawn. When we're talking about animation from a character that is not hand-drawn, not frame-by-frame animation.
If you think about old Disney movies,
Yeah.
like a lot of times if you wanted a character to animate, you start with a character drawing of the character smiling, and then you have another drawing that shows it frowning, and all the drawings in between that. But every time it's a brand new drawing.
Yeah. We're talking not about that kind of character.
So put that idea aside for a second.
That idea for aside. But the tools that we have scaled the productions in such a way to make it faster, more accessible. There are tools out there that allow you to create a character and then have the elements that you've created be animated over time in such a way that you don't have to draw every frame.
Right.
That's basically the idea there. And in order for that to happen, you need this kind of role. It's called a character rigging artist.
Tell me more.
So this is a person who sets up a character technically to create the controls for an animator so that an animator will eventually use them to do their job effectively, right? So this person takes into account the design, the character's technical structure, to create the motion and set sort of its capabilities and limitations for that character. Right. In a way, they decide the character's physical abilities, right? So they're very intertwined in that way. Mm-hmm. So here's an example. If the character needs to be anatomically correct, like a human being, the rigging artist might create limitations around how far a limb might be able to move or stretch or bend or rotate.
Or squash.
And
stretch. And you've just learned an animation principle. Congratulations. Gold stars for
squash
everyone.
And stretch, very different from my limitations.
Oh, yeah. I think this might be a good time. They do this sometimes in productions as well, where people will take stretch breaks.
Oh,
so
like yoga breaks?
And we'll try to bend our own limitations.
Yeah, so one thing, I've stopped doing yoga.
Really?
Entirely. Yeah, I only exclusively do broga.
What?
It's broga. It's bro yoga. Yoga for bros.
Yoga for bros.
It's a real thing. Look it up.
Is it really?
It's absolutely a real thing.
Oh my goodness. There's
it's
a
fantastic.
niche for everything. I didn't realize that it existed. I thought you were joking. Right. That's amazing. I mean, you do you. Live your best life.
Bro. Thank you.
You're welcome. I've got your back, bro. All right. So you understand there's a character rigging artist. Yep. There's a designer prior to that. But once the character is rigged, then you move on to the final role that is the character animator, the role I love so dearly. Basically, character animation is a specialized part of the animation process. Yeah. And it involves really just bringing characters to life through motion, right? So you can kind of think about it like characters are similar to actors. They're just behind the screen instead of in front. So they're thinking about how to breathe life into their characters, how to create the illusion of thought or feeling or personality. And I want to acknowledge that this is sometimes different than another specialty, which is called creature animation. Same thing where you're bringing personality, but whether you're doing that to a character that has 2 limbs or, 8 or 4, anything that way, usually that's considered creature animation. And it involves bringing animals and creatures to life. So you might see that in things like, Game of Thrones, or like anytime you see a dragon on screen, typically that's a creature animator. And they have, usually that's happening within the VFX industry primarily, but it can happen in lots of other places. So just to note, there are different specialties there. But regardless, these 3 roles are very important. And when you're making animated content for marketing purposes specifically, there can definitely be individuals who have the ability to perform all 3 of these roles.
Yeah.
We've seen it with freelancers that we've worked with,
Yeah,
or even within ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes you have one person who designs a character, can rig it, and then animate it like all the way through the pipeline.
All the way through, yeah. It depends on the limitation of style, right?
Yeah.
So just like how, character animators may not be graphic designers, or a motion graphics animator might not be a character animator, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just really important to know that a combination of these roles is the thing that needs to be incorporated into your workflow whenever you consider bringing character animation into a project. So know that those 3 roles need to happen so that animation can be done.
Regardless of any kind of production, if you have a character, if it's a creature, if it's a humanoid, you will need these 3 steps, these 3 roles will need to be fulfilled by someone.
Now, you might say, people. Well, how is technology changing this? And we do want to answer that question for you. It does affect the roles in slightly different ways, but we're going to cover that in a hack. So stay tuned for that. Keep that question aside at the moment.
Yeah, I think there's a new AI button that basically you just press. It's online, and it animates your whole project and that's it. Like
what?
It's just a single click animation.
Please don't tell me that.
I think that
Please
now
don't
exists.
tell me that
Pretty
exists.
Sure.
I'm not
it's
ready.
Like $10 a month. You just animate.
Oh, it's a subscription.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Are you kidding me? Yeah.
Well, while we still have our jobs before this AI takeover, as always, we're going to assign some roles. So we're going to talk about this problem through the lens of a marketing communication professional and through a creative.
Yeah.
So, Will, do you want to start with the marketer side?
Yeah. So, as a marketer, communications person, maybe I'm a product marketer, maybe I'm thinking about how to market my product or thing. And I have come up with a story idea for the most part, probably, to think about how I could utilize the medium of animation. How can I tell this story through animation, attract a little bit more attention online and stuff like that.
Disrupt the market. As
disrupt the market. Sure.
Yes.
Because I know my audience might connect with my product, seeing those characters that I hope will represent them and their situations through this story. So the idea is to show the product or service as the hero of the story, right? We always want to show the product or service as the hero. And the characters should all match sort of my personas from the people who I'm trying to target. So that's the campaign strategy we usually recommend. If you're going to tell a character story through animation, you want your product to be the hero and you want your characters to be the personas of the people who you're targeting. So I'm not sure maybe where to start in that process, right? Or how those characters will convey that story effectively.
Right.
And,
but the story's great.
Well, it's an idea at that point, right? I'm in the ideation phase of my own process,
which is a fun place to be.
Yeah, and I start grabbing other people and coming up with meetings and talking about this stuff. And one member of my team maybe suggest having groups of characters. Oh, we should have a bunch of characters. Like we have so many personas. Or maybe we want to represent the full spectrum of our target audience. Another person might suggest like having the main character talk as if they as if one's narrating back and forth and having a conversation. So we have a lot of ideas floating around, but I'm not sure how many of them we can actually implement.
That's fair. That's a fair question.
Yeah. So, and at the moment, if you've had experience with character animation before, you might not know how complex your idea is. I don't know maybe how much time I need, right? I know I have a deadline. That's probably the case. I probably have a yearly budget that I have to calculate my spend on. So I probably know what I want to spend, but I'm not sure how much I can get for that amount of money.
Right.
So if I don't sort of connect that gap, bridge that gap, I might not see my vision realized.
Right. Which you would just hate to see.
You really hate to see it.
You do. I mean, sometimes I really wonder if I have the vision to see my Jarvis project through.
Wow. Wow.
WandaVision was a great show.
WandaVision was a great show.
Really enjoyed that one. Yeah.
WandaVision.
Come on. Yes.
Shout out to that show. It's a very good show.
Definitely.
So that's sort of my marketer's perspective right now. What's the creative perspective?
Yeah. So if we're thinking about that same moment in time, right? You're coming to me with your idea for the project that you have, and you might have already come up with the script, and at the most basic level, you've probably at least presented your team's ideas. You've brought it out on the table, and it's really explaining what outcomes that you want to see and maybe what should happen within the story, which all sounds great and exciting, and can't wait to get started.
Yeah.
And as you're going through it during that meeting, I start to get a little bug-eyed almost because I'm like, oh, we're talking really extensively about the content of your piece, which is wonderful. So we might start to ask questions about the characters, the visual and motion styles. We've covered that a little bit already, but
splitting those up.
We see those as two different things, at least in our perspective. But we'll talk about your audience and your goals to kind of get a better sense of what you're looking for. And midway through that meeting, that's where I start to notice that like my eyes go wide and I'm like, I know your character ideas are very complex. And the biggest challenge there is that the time frame that you've allotted for us to actually complete that is not doable.
Yeah. 99% of the time, I think that's the case in our experience.
Yeah, it's usually just too short to be able to get all your ideas on the table.
Yeah, exactly.
And so there might be this sort of misalignment that's happening between your budget and the cost of that ask that you're asking for.
Yeah.
And in some cases, sometimes you might not even tell us your budget for any reason that you might have. But what happens is at the end of that meeting, I'm left feeling pretty terrible because I already know right away that I'm going to have to be the one to like push back on your creative ideas. And at a point where we're in the ideation phase, like I want to be able to support that as much as possible. So, I hate when that happens.
Yeah, I think it's like when you have to like confront your child and say like, look, the fishy has to be flushed down the toilet now.
No. No, little Georgie.
You've named my metaphorical fish.
Of course. Yeah, you hate to see it, for sure.
To see it.
But ultimately, right, the idea here is that I want to help create the best story that I possibly can.
Right.
And so I start to think about how can I, as a creative, give you the information that you need to be able to work within the confines of your budget and your time, and in a way that you're not feeling lost about the process. Yeah. And instead, we all come out of that meeting feeling actually pretty confident that we can do the work within the time, within the budget, and it's still going to be freaking awesome.
Yeah, and without sacrificing the idea of a character.
Yeah,
like there's definitely different ways, and we're going to cover this in a hack, but there's different ways to attack character animation in such a way that it is actually doable for your budget. It's just you have to kind of approach it in a different way depending on what you're trying to do.
Yeah. So a question comes up here of like, how can we figure this out together? Like what do we need to do? Can you maybe you can start but providing a couple different like solutions around how to solve this problem.
Yeah. So if you've never done this before, obviously, number one, you want to understand your goals. You want to think about your audience, and you want to clarify the purpose of utilizing characters, right? Are you trying to educate, sell, entertain? Back to those three questions. I think we talked about that in our very first episode.
Yeah. Combo number 5 for those who
or a combination. Yeah. Combo number 5. Who's the target audience? Who are we targeting and why? Obviously, you want to communicate that as clearly as possible to a creative team, but you also want to have that in the back of your head of like, what do they look like? What is their design?
Are they relatable to your audience?
Exactly.
That's so huge. It's worth repeating.
And then another part is like, why this character, right? What do they look like? What are their traits? How do they behave? What is their essence? And you can do that through customer interviews. You could do that through surveys. You can do that in all kinds of ways. But you really want to have a sense of who that character in the end is going to be.
Yeah, just like writing any good story.
I've seen some questions around branding and marketing saying like, describe your target audience as like a famous character or a famous person, who would that person be?
Right.
And then that would give you sort of a sense of who that
kind
person
of in the
is.
same way of making a story where you're like, oh, it's like Steven Universe meets like Breaking Bad, which that would be an interesting story. But it's like, okay,
I see it.
combine like two different characters
I
together.
see
That
Steven
might help.
Universe doing a little bit of math or something.
No, don't do that.
Cooking math in a very safe environment.
Nope, you already got canceled. That's it. Yeah, but it's the idea of like, you could probably do that with characters too. Like, what does this remind you of a famous actor, like, or a famous story or something of that nature? All right, well, so that's nice to know. But what if I have those answers already and I'm, ready to jump into a production?
Yeah, so let's talk about production workflow. What should I know as a marketer from the character perspective, from the character animation side?
I'm so glad you asked. Yes, so as the character animator, one thing to know is that character animation really requires each character to be designed, to set up through rigging, and then to be animated, right? Those 3 roles that we talked about earlier. These 3 production stages are what's going to drive your production cost for character animation. And it's important to know kind of the reason why we go through these steps. So the reason why we design characters to begin with is to determine that look and feel, to make them relatable to your audience based on your goals. We're going to establish how they behave, not only within themselves, but within the world that we're creating. If we're setting up scenes of any kind of nature, if they jump between different environments, all of that has to be taken into account. And we're establishing any design rules for the animators to work off of. So a question is like, can the characters extend past the point of their physical limitations on their body? Or are they confined to those proportions?
I'll jump in here. So it reminds me of this. We just had we went to an event at Another Age Productions.
Oh, yeah.
And the person there was talking about the llama from, what's that insurance company?
The llama?
Yeah, the llama.
You're talking about the emu?
The emu.
I don't know any insurance llama.
Limu emu. What
Limu
is that?
Emu. That's Liberty Mutual. So
we just went to...
We're keeping that in.
We're keeping this whole thing in? Oh, my God. I thought it was a llama. It's an emu. You're right.
Yeah. So close. They're right. Llama if you put them
emus,
next to each other, you'll be able to see
it. They're the same, right?
Yeah.
They're the same. Anyway, the person there was talking about how they went through a whole character design setup in terms of how they move and how they bend, what they look like. There's a whole sort of, when you're talking about branding, you want to make sure that character looks good from every single angle, every single side, and in the animation that it's portrayed in the right way. So,
good things to keep in mind. Another part of this that I really want to dig into I think is really important is that you can expand what your definition of a character is for character animation.
Like an emu.
Right. It can be an emu, but characters don't need to have head or arms or
limbs
or anything like that to even be considered a character. So an example of that is like inanimate objects like pens and pencils that start to move and come to life, or just shapes, squares and circles. Like anything that's abstract can be taken on to have personality, to have motion, to behave in a particular way. So just don't necessarily think about like anytime you're like, oh, I have to add characters, it has to be people, because it doesn't. Right. It can be so many different things.
Exactly.
Ultimately here, the creative and the communication professional should work together to define what a character is going to be in that particular moment, right? All right, so the last thing here is that, again, the reason behind all of this, the reason why we need to rig the character is because animators can't just move a character on screen magically.
You can't just move it?
You can't just move it.
Are you kidding me?
They usually need these things called controls, and rigging is the act of setting up those controls to be able to move.
Right.
So once a rigging artist knows the creative boundaries that they're working within, they can set up the character to be able to bend or deform or to stay or to even like limit their motion,
right.
And give the animators the proper controls to make that move. It's really like, if you think about in physical world, like the animator is almost like a puppeteer, or like dealing with like marionettes and things. And rigging is the strings and the like device that's holding that they're holding in their hand to move those puppets.
Yeah, the cross brace.
That's what it's called?
It's called a cross brace.
Oh, I didn't know
that. It's a thing that you hold
Is that true? Yeah.
I think so.
Okay.
It's a cross and it's braced to the puppet.
I feel like I'm giving you sussy eyes now because I'm not sure. Yeah, if there's any puppeteers out there, let us know what it's properly called.
I'm pretty sure it's a cross
It
brace.
could, yeah, it could be, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, imagine that though. That's,
so you gotta like, if you were thinking about it, you're like putting the strings on the puppet, putting
just
it
like that
onto
NSYNC music video.
Oh,
bye.
my
I'm
God.
bringing it back, baby.
Bringing it back.
Yes.
You were absolutely right. Yes. Yes. If you were going to, puppeteer JT, you need to do the whole rig that moves him.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Good call. Good call. So I've decided as a marketing and communications professional, I'm going to do a character animated piece.
Yay.
I am ready to go.
I'm ready to animate.
What things might I want to keep in mind?
Yeah, that's a fair question. So something in the sort of commercial advertising marketing world that we deal with a lot is the idea that characters should be a complement and a support instead of a distraction. You can kind of think about it like if you're putting a character next to some data or some impact that you want to show on screen or some text, if you have that character dancing around, getting hyped, like doing for some reason, like they're really pumped about this data. Okay. Right. If you're having that, then ultimately the place where people are going to look is at the character and not the data. And the data is the thing that you want them to absorb, right?
You want to drive the viewer's eye.
Yeah, because motion creates attention. So creatives should really be strategic about where the character is being placed, how it's going to move in certain scenes, and why it's going to move either more or less in particular instances. So there are some things you can ask yourself in either the script stage or even before you get into this full production that we're getting into. A question you can consider is like, does this section of the video even need a character, right? Oftentimes we find a lot where it'll be like, oh, let's throw in the character here. Let's throw in the character there for like the sake of it, rather than understanding like what is the message that needs to be delivered at that moment.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
Does the character need to be there?
It happens a lot when you want to talk about like diversity and inclusion. Let's just throw every over
character.
there. Yeah, and it's like, okay, well, that's 50 characters that you've given us. That's a whole lot more work that we're dealing with. Yeah.
Right. And you can be so much more intentional about why each character is showing up in
I think
scenes.
it's better to have one character that represents your persona rather than like 50 characters that kind of miss the mark a little bit,
something to be really clear about there.
Yeah.
So again, is it supporting in this moment or is it distracting from the overall piece or the message you're trying to share? And if you're going to use multiple characters, let's say it is important to have those 50 characters in, another question you can ask is, do they all need to move? Can we be static in some ways and just show the main characters moving? So lots of things to consider. And I think these are a good question to start from, but we've given a lot of information already and we haven't gotten to probably the big question everybody's been asking.
Money
question. The money. Oh boy.
Oh my
Would you like some water?
Jesus.
Yeah. So let me ask you.
I don't know where that came from.
Tell me, Will, how does all of this relate to production costs for characters? That's the question, right? If we're talking about cost, what does this mean? Yeah,
so I think in our experience, most of the production problems that we've seen, and not just in our space, but in other places, the problems come from the misunderstanding around scope. And, after a project's already begun. The scope changes in the middle of a project, almost always.
Scope change, real.
Yeah, so it's safe to say that obviously added labor will increase your costs.
Yeah.
I don't know how that cost incurs in other places. At our place, it's a day rate. You increase the day rate by the number of days that we need to change the scope. So here are some requests. I'm going to give you a list of requests that can change the scope drastically when it comes to character animation within production.
Right. These are things that sometimes happen in our productions that we have to then say, okay, that's a scope change. It's either going to cost more, the scope changes, or we got to pivot or rethink things.
Yeah, and sometimes we'll like give you suggestions on what to do differently. But So number one, adding additional unique characters. So these are entirely new. We need to add these many characters. So depending on the amount of characters, it increases the amount of time required to produce those characters.
Always.
We'd multiply that amount of production time by every one character that you need. Every single character, again, requires those 3 steps that we talked about a little earlier. We need to design them, we need to rig them, and then we need to animate them.
Yep.
So that depends on how many new characters you want. The caveat here in this particular one is that when you ask about duplicating existing characters and changing their appearance, it may have different implications depending on style choices, workflow, how things have been set up. There are so many different ways to tackle it that I don't want to lead you down the wrong path unless we have a very unique and specific example. Yeah, so that's what happens.
Right. So tell me another way. That's one big one.
That's one big one. Number 2 is updating the story to include your character in new scenes, new shots. You have a character. This is your hero character. It's your main character. And now you want to add that character to multiple scenes.
Right. You've already written the script. You've already approved maybe what shots were going to have characters and not have characters.
Yep.
And then you look at the storyboard maybe and you're like,
well, let's just throw them in here.
Yeah. Yeah, just throw them
I feel like it would be great if we had Bobby. Let's just say Bobby is our character. Bobby's going to be right here. Bobby's going to be over here. Can we add more Bobby? No. Can we add more Bobby? No.
Poor Bobby.
We can add more Bobby. It's just a change of scope, right?
Yeah. So that's especially true if it doesn't move the story forward. Right.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Right. So having a character wave to the camera is nice, right? But does it actually help reinforce your message or your story?
I'm waving.
Generally, this adds animation time, but it might not actually add any more value to the actual shot. You want the shot to be the most valuable it can be by doing what it's supposed to do in the shot.
Maximum value.
Right. So if we wanted to, we could put that character in, right? But this means we'll need to redo the layout stage. Remember, we talked about that in the earlier episodes.
Oh, yeah.
Redo the layout for that section, and then we need to reanimate that particular shot. We need to add a new shot. So depending on the ask, it could get out of hand very quickly.
Yeah. So definitely something to keep in mind.
Yeah. So really think about, does it move the story forward? Is it necessary for this character to be here if the point of the shot has nothing to do with him or them?
Yeah. Sometimes you just need text. That's okay.
Well, yeah. You could do it other ways.
Yeah. There's so many ways.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Yeah. Give us the last one.
So the third part is changes to your character design after a certain point in production.
Oh, no.
Namely, after the character design stage. Obviously, we talked about those 3 roles.
Yep.
Character design, character rigging, character animation. They have to happen in sequence.
Yeah.
It cannot happen outside of that.
If I animate a character for 40 hours, and then you tell me that the entire design of the character...
Can you add a satchel? Let's just add a satchel to this.
There's so many different types of scenarios. But if you want to redesign the character altogether, like, boy, is that tough. Yeah. That's a hard blow.
Yeah. So this is typically what we would consider a big design change. So keep that in mind. Depending on the tools you're using, the setup of the character, and your desired changes, this is going to affect everything. So you might need to redo the rigging for the animation for the newly designed character. And it adds not only design time, but it also adds rigging and animation time. So it's kind of that time gets compounded
by 3
depending on the type of change you're talking about. So note that there's a huge debate about what's a small design change and what's a big design change. Okay. So honestly, they're so situational. They're very hard to predict that we can't tell you necessarily right now.
Well, but I kind of want to go off of that a little bit.
You want to try it?
Yeah, I want to. We can kind of think about this like almost like a lightning round.
Lightning round.
Yeah. We have I'll give you maybe some situations, and you tell me whether or not they're a small change or a big change.
Okay.
Yeah, a little quiz. There's no prize, but
no prize.
Yeah.
It's a waste of my time. What am I doing here? There are no prizes on this show?
Maybe if you, the audience, guess, we also don't have any prize, but you can just tell us that you did it, and we'll be proud of you. Okay. All right. Let me give you them here. So, all right. Pretend I'm the client in this situation, right?
Got it.
I would like to change the color of the clothing on this 3D character.
Totally fine. Small change.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. That's cool.
Well, okay. So if you're rendering in real time using something like Unreal Engine or Unity, a color change, very, very small.
Right. Okay, cool.
Small design change.
Great.
If you're rendering traditional rendering, depending on how many shots you have, that's a lot of rendering. for traditional purposes.
All right, this is not a lightning round.
No, go ahead. That's fine. I just want to make sure that I've covered all my bases.
Right. I did say 3D characters.
You did say 3D. So.
It's good to know. Yeah. All right. What if I want to, let's say, duplicate a 2D character like we were talking about before? Maybe I want to change out the skin tone and maybe add like a really sweet hat.
Okay.
And yeah, what would that be?
That in 2D, that's a small change, I think. But do you want the animation to be different?
Oh.
You've duplicated the character, you've changed the skin tone, you've added a hat. I'm assuming that tells me that you want
to high five the other character. So.
Oh yeah, that's a big change.
Okay. I see.
Now we're adding animation and the rigging. So you'll save the rig because it's the same character, but you will have you'll have to animate that
rig
second.
The hat though too.
Depends
on how much
but
motion
rigging a hat is like not that big of a deal.
Depends.
In 2D, no way. Totally fine. Small change.
Tell us your most complicated hat rig. Okay. I want to add a second character to a scene.
Okay.
To have them interact with the first character that you've already animated.
I want to add a second character to a scene.
Yeah.
And have them interact with the first character that I've already animated.
Correct.
Big change.
Why?
Because I have to change the animation on the character that's already animated, and I have to rig, design, and animate another character in the scene.
Right.
It's a brand new character. Yeah.
Okay.
Big change.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. All right. So let me give you another one. I want to make a crowd.
Okay.
Of 2D characters.
Yep.
Right. But they're in the background.
Okay.
And they're using the same animation that the main character is using. So I'm basically going to almost copy paste the animation from the main character and put it onto the crowd.
Okay. Yeah, that's a small change, but it's going to look pretty terrible.
Oh, no. Why? What do you mean?
Well, so let me just go through it. So you have a 2D cycle. Usually if it's a crowd, you're going to have cycles to the crowd, depending on what you're doing. If it's in 2D, you're going to use that same cycle. You're going to offset it a bunch of times across many different copies. And if it's in the background, you're probably going to have some sort of depth pass or something like that that's going to make some invisible or some hide some. And it's going to look repeated.
Right.
It's
if they're
it's
all
a repeated
doing the
pattern.
same motion.
Yeah. Humans are really good at figuring out patterns and looking and seeing patterns very easily. And so your humanistic eye will be like, that person is doing the same thing as that person. It's going to look exactly the same.
Right.
So you're going to be like, oh. Okay. But if it's a short shot, it might not matter. It's a small shot. It's
That's fair.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Last one.
Okay.
I want to change this part of a scene.
Okay.
So that instead of only seeing the character's hand, right now we're only showing the character's hand waving. I want to show the whole body instead.
Okay. Well, it's a big change because we have to move it into place. You could probably save the wave animation, but what's the rest of the body doing? Do you want it to animate? Do you want it to move? Do you want
as
it to
the
dance?
Animator, I have to say that depends on how the person animated it.
Ooh,
because sometimes, because there are definitely times where to save time and money, people will cut corners in terms of if there's an animation and the camera cuts off at a certain point, you might only animate just the wrist, or you might only animate.
You might not have animated the whole thing.
You might not have animated the whole thing, and so that's a note for animators. There's a practice that my mentor taught me that was just at least imagine that the body still has some animation. Apply some animation to all parts of the body.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's like if you're doing a shot from the waist up, I still will animate a little bit of the legs so that I have some semblance of understanding the point of gravity that the character has.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then if the director is like, hey, can we pull this out? Can we show the whole body instead? I've already got it covered.
So you're thinking ahead.
I'm trying to think ahead.
You definitely have to think ahead there.
Yeah. So it's worth doing because you never know if a client might say something like that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And so be prepared.
Yeah.
like a Cub Scout. Like the Cub
Do you want
Scout of animation.
Animation badge for the Girl
I would
Scouts?
love that.
Yeah. Okay,
yeah.
I'll make you one.
Oh, thank you.
All right, so you want to summarize here?
Yeah, let's go through a summary. So character animation can create a ton of engagement, which is always fun, but only if the intention behind utilizing them is actually clear, right? So you should really work with creatives early on in the process to understand if characters are even necessary for your piece to begin with, right? Don't put in characters just for the sake of putting them in.
Yeah.
Another thing to note is that the production workflow for character animation, it's a 3-step process, right? It's designing, rigging, and then animating each character, not just one.
So I'm gonna stop you there.
Yeah.
So obviously there's new tools, generative AI.
Yep.
That would only really take care of the design part. And even then you probably have to alter it anyway.
Right.
So you still have to rig, you still have to animate. And there are some tools that help you in animation through this, but yeah, it's not there yet.
It's a whole thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so finally, the biggest requests that can increase your production costs are adding new characters anytime you do that, updating the story to add more character work on top of what you've already decided to put in, and then changing the character design later on in production.
Yeah, mostly after we've already animated.
Yes.
I think at that point,
That's
if we're
the biggest
past the
one.
storyboard, I think at the storyboard phase, at least the way we do it, find place to change it.
That's why the storyboard is so critical.
And we'll do a whole episode on storyboards and what that means. But,
yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we hope that information was helpful. We hope it got you thinking about ways in which you can think about characters and incorporating them into your projects for your production costs and keeping them in mind. If you have any questions about this especially, please be sure to submit them. We have a website with which you can do that. A
website?
on the World Wide Web. Yes.
We have a website.
It is openpixelstudios.com/podquestion. So stupid. Here we are. Yeah, you want to talk about the tease?
Yes, the tease. I haven't done a tease in so long because I feel like we've been doing a lot. We've been doing a lot of interviews. Yeah. So we just did our interview run. But our next episode is another hack. We'll talk about all the ways to approach character animation that will save you time and money and money. And money.
Want to save you on that money. But yeah, big thank you as always to eMedia for producing this podcast. Our producer is Jackson Foote. Our music was created by Hidden and licensed through premiumbeat.com. And now, we haven't said it in so long. It's time. God. It's time. I know one listener in particular who was very distraught that we hadn't said our catchphrase until this point again. So until next time, stay honest.
Stay creative.
Stay open.
Thank you so much for listening and watching, and stick around for a bad idea.
For those audio listeners.
See ya.
Bye.